This is the Guns Magazine podcast, episode number 49. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting people who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. Before we get started, let's talk about our sponsor, Kimber Firearms. Kimber was founded with the singular purpose of making every firearm the best it can possibly be, with a fit and finish that only practiced hands can achieve and appreciate. Whether you carry a Kimber for personal protection, hunting, or competition, know that their promise of quality without compromise is how they measure success. To learn more about Kimber Firearms, visit kimberamerica.com. Today is our first two-parter episode. 2 weeks ago, in episode number 47, we talked to Roy Huntington about Safari 101. It was a great lesson on how to set up your first safari and some of the things you need to take into consideration. Moving forward, we decided take two was in order to revisit a few things in more depth and to ask a few new questions about the entire experience of hunting in Africa. And now here's my chat with Roy Huntington about Safari 101, Part 2. Well, good morning yet again, Roy. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, sir. Always happy to be here.
Well, after we did 2 weeks ago, we did the Safari podcast. You are an old Africa hand, and all that did was whet my appetite and raise a lot more questions. So we thought, hey, let's do Africa Part 2. So that will be big fun today.
Dude, I think and I'm not an expert. I want to make sure everybody knows that. I know too many people who've been there 20 times, you know, but there's a lot of things that I've learned in the few trips that I've been there. And as you said before, you and I know a lot of people who've been there many times. And so we've all picked their brains and, you know, and so I have a good sense, I think, of what to expect.
Yep. Well, I think the number one question on this part 2 of Safari definitely has to be guns. Now, in the first episode, in your experience, you said first time use the outfitter's guns because it saves a lot of trouble. But, you know, the essence of a quote unquote real safari is you've got to take your custom side by side and, you know, you take a buffalo at 10 paces in a charge. Now, maybe you won't get that done, but let's talk about taking your own gun, something that you want to use. Let's start from square one. You're going to the airport. How do you get all that done?
The very first thing you do is you talk to the PH, and a PH is your professional hunter, and you ask them, what do I need to do to get my gun and ammunition into wherever it is you're hunting? Mm-hmm. Because, you know, they're the professionals. They know how to do this. And so they will oftentimes will either send you the forms or send you a link to the government website there, Namibia or wherever, and then you can download forms that you need pre-filled out for when you get there. And now most of the countries have an ammunition limit also, so you need to figure out what that is. Might be 40 rounds, might be 60 rounds. And then on our side of the water here, you obviously need a really good quality, waterproof, lockable, you know, rifle case. And something to remember, if you're bringing one rifle, for instance, then the rifle case can also carry a lot of your other stuff, you know, so your boots and, you know, and other things, you know, put it all in the rifle case if you can. That's pretty handy. The other thing you have to do is stop by your local customs, and even smaller towns will often have someone who can act as that, you know, clearinghouse kind of, or you may end up having to drive somewhere. But what you want to do is take everything that you have that's serial numbered, your binoculars and, you know, and stuff like that, rifles, optics, cameras, and even expensive jewelry, which I don't recommend that you take with you. But if you're determined to wear your Rolex watch or something, you better take it with you, because what happens there is you can photograph it there at the customs place, which the guy that I use is really nice. He's got an official U.S. Customs sign that only they have, and they put it in the picture. So then you take a picture of all this stuff. And then they give you a customs form which lists each item by serial number. And the reason you do that is because that way, when you come back into the country, you don't have to pay duty on things that they think you bought while you were gone.
Yeah.
So your Rolex watch, you can prove that you had before you left to go to Africa. And so it's a bit of a pain in the neck to do that, but you have to. There's no way around it. That's part of going to Africa, which is another reason, like I said, if you're not going to take a gun, it helps to make things a little bit simpler. And so then there you go. So then you get on the airplane and you book it just like you would any firearm. The key thing here is, depending on how your travel arrangement is, it's really nice if you can book the gun through, so you don't have to pick it up. But that's getting increasingly harder to do, from what I understand. So in our situation, for instance, one year we flew to, I think it was Frankfurt and first, and we had a 10-hour layover there, so you could get a hotel at the airport and you clean up and take a nap and stuff like that. It makes it much more civilized. But the only challenge there was you had to get all of your luggage. And so, we had to schlep this, rifle and everything through the Frankfurt airport to our room, and then get out early enough that you had to recheck everything back in. And as I recall at the time, I think we flew into whatever the capital of Namibia is, Windhoek, I think it is. We flew into Windhoek, and then we had to catch a pedal jumper or something, and they wouldn't check it through. So we had to pick up the luggage and the rifle and then recheck it with the little puddle jumper. And so John Sheehan, who was our PH in Botswana, he said a lot of times if you do a hissy fit initially, that you can get people to check your stuff all the way through, literally all the way through to, to the little puddle jumper. And so it's really up to you. But I understand when I took Susie to Namibia, we took a Ruger #1 customized by Gary Reeder in 375, just because that's what you do, It was like that. And then we had a Model 70, a custom Model 70 that I had built for me a million years ago. And but when we landed there, it was 3.5 hours clearing customs because of the rifles.
Yeah.
And so everyone just kind of sits around and waits your turn. And then it's a bit of a reverse of that when you leave sometimes. So there is a bit of that. When we were in Zimbabwe, it was, I think when we got into the country, it probably took a similar amount of time and about $40 in cash to sort of make it happen, and then a similar thing when we left. So best thing to do is ask your PH and say, what do I need to do?
Yeah. Well, we're not going to talk about guns because there's a lot of information about that and there's no clear-cut answer, but let's talk about optics. That's something that you don't see as much information about, and yet that's as critical to the undertaking as anything else. So if a guy's looking to buy an optic specifically to take to Africa, what would you suggest?
Well, remember, it's there is no corner gun store there. And so what you take with you is basically what you're going to have. Now, some people will buy 2 scopes. And in other words, mount them both on the gun so it works. Then one gets packed away as a backup and one goes on the rifle. I'm a strong proponent of very simple, very simple. I mean, you honestly could go to Africa with a fixed 4-power scope and be perfectly fine. You truly see and it really depends on where you're going too. When we were in Zim, I don't think I had a shot that was over 100 or 125 yards. I was using, as a matter of fact, it was the first Ruger Scout rifle that they had in 308. So it was this little short barreled. It had a 2-power loopholed handgun scope on it. It was perfectly fine, but then, for instance, in Namibia, Susie was regularly shooting to 300 and 400 yards. So, but even then we had a Model 70 30-06, and I think it had like a 3 to 7 loopholed hunting scope, a simple scope. And she was perfectly fine. I mean, she was not under opticked or over opticked. But something to keep in mind is that it is really hard on the guns. You generally will carry your guns in a soft zippered case on some kind of a rack in the truck. and the trucks are just, real rough, tough, old,
Yeah.
jiggly, and you're bouncing over up and down roads. And so the guns really live hard. So I think having some uber delicate, high power, variable optics, all that stuff is just more things that can break,
Yeah.
And I think that if you have some kind of a rifle with a scope that's got backup iron sights on it, perfect. I mean, there you go. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. New England Custom Gun, there's some other companies make scope mounts that have built-in iron sight backups and stuff like that. So
Right.
I think the key is, you had said we won't really need to talk about guns, but just a couple of little things about that is that you don't take a 243, but I would say start at the 7mm range up, and 270, 308, 30-06, that kind of stuff. You probably could use a 6.5 Creedmoor if you're not going after anything really big. But for all your plains game, so if you think hunting deer in Missouri, or in the desert up here or something like that, whatever you would take to do that would be perfectly fine to take with you there. So the only thing is, don't get real frangible ammunition. That's another mistake that the PHs say they see all the time. Americans will take some, lightweight, high velocity, ballistic tippy kind of, 90-pound whitetail load, and you just really can't do that. As a matter of fact, when we hunted, it was with the 308, that suppressed 308, and we used some no-name, 168 grain round nose soft point 308, and it was a killing machine. I mean, it just, penetrated deeply. They always opened up, and it worked really. As a matter of fact, Tank did an article in Guns on that.
So what about red dots? I actually saw a couple of people say that those work pretty good, again, if you're not doing the long distance shooting.
Yeah, I think, it's like anything. If you've got maybe a 3 or 4 mil dot, I wouldn't want to take a 7 or 8 mil dot because that'd be too big. But, the reality is that, this shot may be at 40 yards and the next shot may be at 320, So now granted, you could say, hey, I'm not, very good with what I'm doing here. I'm going to limit myself to 100 yards or 125 yards. And you probably could do that in most places. The challenge would be, hey, there's the perfect zebra that we've been looking for all morning, and he's at 275 yards, and you've got a 5 mil red dot sight, and it's noon in the Kalahari.
Yeah.
So if it were me, I wouldn't take a red dot sight. I mean, maybe if you were optically challenged, or, you didn't have the best eyesights, or you're hunting with a kid, or something, and you wanted, then sure. I would talk to your PH because they know best for their area.
Of course. Well, reading up on it, it's not even so much about the gun itself. All of the PHs that write about this say it's more about getting the shot. So talk a little bit about some of the safari prep. We've both been to FTW Ranch. They do a great dangerous game safari prep course. I know Gunsight does safari prep too, but say somebody's going to go after plains game. What are some of the drills that they need to be familiar with so that they don't embarrass us American riflemen?
You're right. I have that vivid recollection of my PH in Zimbabwe throwing his hat on the ground and stomping on it,
Yeah.
And I think is make sure your equipment works. The stories I've heard from these guys will make people who are gun people just shake their head. I mean, literally people going there with ammunition they've never shot before, in a rifle they've never fired, with a scope that wasn't mounted on the gun yet, and they're going to Africa. It's like, really, people?
Why? Why would you do that? That's a lot of money to go to sight in your rifle.
It's unbelievable. It's truly unbelievable. So I think you just be competent. Like you say, don't embarrass yourself. And so make sure your equipment works, make sure that your gun is clean, make sure that the action runs, make sure the trigger's adjusted correctly, and make sure your ammunition fits in the rifle you're taking. That was a good one. I heard it was like the hunter gets there and he had thrown his 308 in because he thought it was the 7mm. So he gets to Africa, he's got no ammo.
Oh, wow.
I know. It's like, really, people? But uh, we've talked a lot about gun handling skills when it comes to personal defense, and the same thing applies there. You really need to be able to manipulate your guns intuitively. And so when you get out of the truck and the guide in the truck hands you down your rifle, and usually it's a loaded magazine with an empty chamber, right? Well, you need to be able to, close the bolt on an empty chamber. So, press the loaded rounds down, close the bolt safely, double check everything. Don't be afraid to tell the PH and say, I've got an empty chamber and a loaded magazine. He'll thank you. He'll say, thank you, right? And have good muzzle control, keep your finger out of the trigger, all of that stuff. A lot of the guides there want you to leave your rifle bolt up because the gun can't fire, if the bolt is up. Yeah. And so, they don't really trust the safety all the time. So learn how to manipulate your gun, learn how to take the bolt out, take some real basic cleaning gear just in case they don't have it, in case you have some problem, you drop your muzzle in the dirt or something, so just be prepared like that and be competent. And then as far as shooting is like, you really need to know, what if I have to take a 25-yard shot with my rifle? So set up a target at 25 yards and shoot it, and then what I did with our rifle with Susie when she was shooting, I just was spotted. I was a spotter for her. I made up a trajectory chart, and I actually taped it on the butt stock of the rifle, and then I kept one in my shirt pocket. So we had dialed the rifle in for a known distance, and then Susie actually shot it at 50 yards, 100, 150, 200, 253. We shot it out to 400 yards. And so I had the dope. And so we would laser range something. I would say, Susie, it's 350 yards, hold, 10 inches or something, and favor left because we've got a little bit of wind. And so she would say, shooters ready, spotters ready, send it. She would send it. The animal would fall down. The PH would look at us and say, this changes everything. So, but it's only because we practiced. And so practice like that. But don't just say, oh, it's okay, I could figure that out. No. No. And have your buddy with you, and even if you get somebody who's not going with you, have him be your spotter and say, hey, take a shot. It's 150 yards. I show 6 inches of holdover for your 0. Take the shot and practice. And then you will be a hero when you get there. They will love, but I would be very competent out to about 200 yards because that's probably the majority of where you're going. And so if you zero it right, depending on what you're shooting, that's a dead on hold, and just, and practice from shooting sticks. And so really just get 2 broom handles or whatever you have. If you want to buy a set of shooting sticks, that's fine too. Most of them use like a bipod shooting stick. Some of them use a triple one. And they usually just sort of tape together, or they have these heavy duty rubber bands holding everything together at the top. And then they just set it up. And then you use that. And the secret to those shooting sticks is, and I see Americans make this mistake all the time, is that they lean forward and they lean on them real heavy. And they're not made for that. What you want to do is you want to stand up and be comfortable, and you are the shooting platform. So then you put your forend of your rifle on the shooting sticks to steady it. It's not like your hood of your truck, you're leaning over. And so practice that. And I think it's really fun with Susie and I. We were at the range. You could do this at the range. You just have somebody next to you and just set up the shooting sticks right in front of you. And then you bring your rifle up and lay them down and see how fast you can get that 100-yard shot off on a, like a 12-inch paper plate or something like that. So,
yeah. And that's the thing that we've talked about before, but I think it's worth repeating, is the number one thing that costs game any place, but especially in Africa, is being too slow to shoot. And that's what makes the guides crazy. As we've said before, fiddling with the scope, fiddling with everything, and not getting the shot off.
It's so true. Well, the practicing with Susie here, and Susie, she's determined. It's like, get out of my way. I'm going to get this done. And so we went to the range and we shot a lot. And I showed her videos of herself. Here's what you look like on the shooting sticks. Here's why you need to stand up straighter. Here's, and so she made the changes. And so we've shot enough together that I'm usually the spotter. And then, so I'll say, spotter's ready. She says, shooter's ready. And it's like, okay. And then she shoots. And I think I think it was the very first shot we had there. It was a springbuck at 409 yards, and we shot from the truck. And so he said, okay, get that one. See him up on top of the hill there, and Susie said, yeah. And so she was right on it. You hear her, I have a video of it. It's really funny because you hear her run the bolt, and then almost immediately she says, shooter's ready. And I said, 409 yards, I need 10 inches, favor forward a little bit, send it, bang, right? And then the bolt runs, and you hear the tinkle of the brass, and she says, shooter's up, right? And then but the animal's down, right? And I have the video of this. It's really funny because I was holding the camera, and I pan to the PH, and he's got this big toothy grin, and he looks and he goes, "This changes everything," because he was just so happy that that she was able to hit the target, that she was competent with her gun handling skills, and it's as simple as that. And if you can do all of that stuff, which anyone can, then now you can enjoy the hunt. Because you're not worried. Oh, am I going to hit it right? Do I know how to manipulate the rifle? Where's my spare ammo? That's another thing. Is in part of your getting organized is make sure you've got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 extra rounds, because I'll tell you what, one shot can rapidly turn into 7 shots.
Yeah.
It's like, I know you dream about the one shot kills, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen, because it does, but I'll tell you, Susie was more surprised, I think, than any of us when she shot this zebra, and he kicked and then took off. And it was an absolute rock solid hit, a heart lung shot that you couldn't ask, with competent ammunition. Penetrated deeply. This was a dead animal. Yeah. And he just didn't know it. Yeah. And so at that point, I think we talked about, but you just have to now just start shooting, just send more bullets in, because you don't want to run off. And so that's where it's like, I remember there was one time where she was topping off the magazine. So she took a couple shots and she was topping off the magazine in between, resting. And I remember the PH was watching her. And afterwards, he said, "I saw you do that. Oh, that was very good." But that's the kind of stuff a lot of American shooters forget about. It's like, what do I do? Because we're used to deer hunting. You shoot a deer with a 243, they fall down.
Yeah. Well, you raise an interesting point I've never heard anybody talk about, is laser rangefinders, because I would do that, but you never see people talking about it. The picture I think everybody has in their mind, and I did until I started thinking about the nitty gritty, is you are standing behind a bush and your PH goes, "I estimate 402 yards. Take him." So a rangefinder, good thing then, huh?
Well, yeah. And like that one, were you showing it to us a little while ago, the real simple rangefinder?
Yeah. The Halo rangefinder.
Yeah. I have a Leica. And all it is there's a red dot. You push a button, a red dot comes on. You put the red dot where you want to aim. You hit another button, it tells you what the range is. There's no angles. There's no charts and graphs and beeps or anything else. It's very simple. And I'll tell you what, I really like having it. And the PH, I have hunted with PHs. Most of them actually have one in their shirt pocket.
Okay.
Because that way, it's like, just in case, we can range that real quick. Yeah, if it's 100 yards, who cares, right? But I have been amazed at a few times where I've had a PH say, "Oh, that's 340 yards," and I'll laze it, and it'll be 210, or that's 210, but it's 360, So, but especially some of the animals are quite small. I mean, an impala, a springbuck, a blessed buck, a lot of these little animals, they're relatively small. I mean, think, big golden retriever. So you put him out at 350 yards or 300 yards, well, you better be dialed in, And so if you've got 8 inches of drop, you don't have a compensator scope or something that you dial in. But if you have 8 or 10 inches of drop, well, you better know, at that distance. And so I like the kind you just kind of put the loop around your neck and you keep it in your shirt pocket, and it's always handy,
Yep. Anything else on guns we haven't touched on?
I think, but if you are going to take a gun, though, is have a good gun. Just, I mean, yeah, I am amazed at what I see in my sort of gunsmithing hobby is that I'll see some rattled trap, beat up something that somebody is insisting they want to take with them. And it's like, well, man, I know it's your great grandpa's, gun,
Yeah.
but, these springs are 80 years old, so you unless you already have some special gun with you, just go buy a good gun. I'll tell you what, I would hunt anywhere in the world with something like a Ruger American rifle, a synthetic stock. They all shoot 1-inch groups. They're bulletproof. They've got a great trigger. You put a decent optic. I mean, buy a $500 gun, put an $800 scope on it. And if it gets lost or run over by the truck or something, it's not the end of the world. But just buy a good gun and make sure it works before you go. Because I just have heard that story again and again and again, which is people go to Africa and they've never even shot the gun. And,
that's just stunning, just absolutely stunning to me. And I know I've heard the same stories, and it's kind of like you're going to Vail or Telluride and you're going to learn how to ski once you get there. I suppose folks do that. It's a little bit different, but it's the same kind of thing. It's like, if you're going, why don't you at least be ready when you get there? I don't know. Well,
I used to compete a lot with in pistol matches, and everything from PPC kind of target shooting up to, IPSC kind of run and jump and kind of stuff. And I'll tell you what, how many times I saw people show up there with a holster they'd never used before, or a gun they've never fired, or ammunition that they'd never brought. I've seen that at shooting schools. You maybe have too. Somebody shows up at FTW Ranch, you're spending $5,000 on some fancy shooting class, and they show up with a rifle and ammunition they've never shot. It's like, people, So
what about offhand shooting? Because I see that brought up, and that's typically a dangerous game thing because you're talking a dozen yards. But when you're plains game, did you do much offhand shooting?
No, not at all. Because like they say, always cheat, always win. Because your goal there is to take the animal safely and humanely, and you usually don't do that offhand. Now, it's possible. I think I shot a kudu offhand in Zimbabwe, but he was like 40 yards away, and it was like, oh wait, there's a kudu right there. We didn't know that, And he goes,
after you adjusted your scope and adjusted your hat,
well, but actually it's a good point though. At least be prepared to, because if you're on a shooting stick somewhere and it's like shoot, and now he runs off, maybe he's going to run around and run to the left of you behind you, and there's no time to change the shooting sticks. So you get your rifle and then transition safely. Maybe you do need to take an offhand shot at 50 yards or something like that. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but I think it would make sense to at least train a little bit. I mean, Susie and I trained. I had her do some offhand shooting. But as far as like stand up there and take an offhand shot at 150 yards, you'd be a better man than me, Yeah.
Well, and I think, I've been doing some reading, and, long distance shooting and hunting is a big thing. And I'm a long distance shooter. I love doing that. But, having done elk hunting and I do a lot of deer hunting, I can't imagine taking my Ruger Precision and trying to schlep it through the field. Or, I've hunted West Texas, same kind of thing. I can't imagine walking 5 miles with it on my shoulder so I could take a 300-yard shot. So really, I wonder if they're seeing maybe too much equipment instead of a lightweight, just basic good quality type of hunting rifle.
Well, Americans are gear hogs. Let's just say it out loud. What is it? Yes, my name is Roy, and I am a gear hog, right?
And we're complicit in that. We get that.
Yeah. Although I will say, the older I get, it's certainly less and less and less and less. It's less to carry, less to fuss with, less to lose,
less to break.
Less to break. And if we stress anything, let's stress again the fact that if you're going to Africa, is travel light. Truly. I mean, everything should be really minimal and lightweight, because it really helps to let you enjoy what's happening. I mean, when your backpack that you carry on the airplane is literally 90% of what you need while you're in Africa, which it could easily very well be. I know people, that's how they hunt in Africa. They carry a backpack, and that's their carry-on. There is no checked luggage. There is no, rifles and ammo that they take with them, and that's what they have. And you could do that. So I think the way to do it is we talked about before, is just make a pile of the stuff. This is all the stuff I'm taking to Africa with me, right? And then as you get closer to the date, now start culling it. And I don't think it's inappropriate for us to maybe talk about that for 4 or 5 minutes here. And that truly 3 shirts, 3 pants, a pair of shorts, underwear accordingly, and socks, a pair of tennis shoes for in camp, a pair of whatever kind of hunting boots you want to wear. The other thing to remember too is that the PHs tend to use lighter weight, low cut boots. And I realized that the first time I went, when I had your typical, 5'11" desert, military boots.
Yeah.
Well, they're heavy, and they make a lot of noise when you walk. They go clump, 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 clump. And these guys tend to have soft sole shoes. Everything is really lightweight and minimal. Cotton, breeze, and all that kind of stuff. So other than that, if you want to have a real lightweight pair of binoculars, a shirt pocket camera, a small personal first aid kit, maybe a pocket tool, if you're taking a gun with you, some really lightweight little tiny zipper pouch, cleaning rod, a brush, some patches, and a little thing of, break free or something, and a baseball cap, you're there. I mean, you're really there. Ear protection. Because especially if you're sitting next to somebody and they're shooting, you want some ear protection. I like the sonic ear valves, but you could carry a set of and these modern, Bluetoothy, electronic ear protection that actually goes in your ear. Gosh, those would be almost perfect, because that way when you're following the PH and he's whispering to you, go here, do this, But I'm truly, that's all you need. Some of your favorite snacks.
Well, on clothing now, except in South Africa, camo is verboten. So just khaki or dark green, or does it matter?
Well, and that camouflage thing is actually changing in some areas. So you check with your PH. You don't really need it. I mean, you're in a truck, for crying out loud. Yeah. Right? Rattling up the road. You'll find most of the PHs stick with their khaki tends to be really dark, almost more like dark earth desert, than our lighter colored khaki. So it really depends on where you're going. In Zimbabwe, for instance, greens and dark grays looked really good. You blended in really well because it was jungly. Like where we were in Namibia in the Kalahari, a light sagey. Think if you were going to hunt high desert in America. And so sages, khakis, grays, those work really good. And just stick with that. I mean, in other words, your 3 shirts and 3 pants, those are your travel clothing too. So what I would do is I would take 2 shirts, 2 pants, maybe my shorts and my tennis shoes in my pack. Wear your boots or your chukka shoes, with you. And have your undies and your small binoculars. Have that stuff in your carry-on bag, and then that way, when you get halfway there, you can change into your clean clothes that you have in your bag. And then when you get where you're going, now you have the 3rd clean set of clothes, which maybe was in your checked luggage, and those you'll wear on your first day. And when you get back after the first day, your other clothes are clean, sitting on your bed. So it's pretty cool.
Let's talk about this luggage. My wife's got a nice pink and black hard side, giant wheeled suitcase that I bought her for Christmas. She loves it, and it works great when we're, flying in the U.S. Given that once you get to Africa, you're going to be rattling around. What's the best kind of luggage? Soft luggage, backpacks, or is my pink hard case 4-wheeler going to work just fine?
That's a really good question. I am a strong advocate of heavy duty, soft sided, because you're going to be, for instance, if you go where we're talking about with the Sheehan's group at Kudu Safaris, you've got 2 5-hour car drives, and in a Toyota Land Cruiser with 4 or 5 adults in the car. So being able to stuff your luggage in the back is really important. And so if you show up with a big hard-sided something, they're not going to be amused. You know, so ideally the backpack that you carry with you on the flight could double as your backpack that you're going to carry with you in the truck.
Right.
Sometimes they have a backpack and then it'll have like a smaller backpack that attaches to it. That might even be better because you can take the little one with you during the day, you know, because you will need to take, depending on the season, some kind of layered, you know, underwear and a lightweight jacket or something. So, but I heartily recommend that you take I absolutely have to have this to spend 2 weeks in Africa, needs to be with you on the airplane. You know, so the other stuff, because I have seen people who go there and the luggage doesn't show up for 10 days.
Oh,
you know? So even
bad juju.
Even if you're bringing your rifle, I would be prepared to use the PH's gun, you know, just if that happens. So soft luggage. And then there also is a little bit about security, which is when you're in camp, you could just be frank and ask the PH about that and say, hey, you know, I've got my, paperwork. This is a good point. Make Xerox copies of all of your paperwork and keep them separate from the originals. So that way if you lose your passport, you can go to the consulate and say, here's a copy of my passport. You know, and trust me, it'll really speed things up. But charge cards, all that kind of stuff, have backups. I would also take 2 charge cards, 2 separate charge cards, 2 separate accounts in case one of them gets turned off on you or something, which happened to us.
Great point.
One of them got hacked and I went to pay and it was like, oh, now what? Right. Fortunately, I had cash. Yeah. So 2 separate charge cards, you know, one with you, one with whoever you're hunting with. But we had a small lockable zippered case, and at this particular place where we stayed had our room locked, and so you know we kept our personal things, extra cash, stuff like that, just locked away, out of sight, out of mind, you know, just in case.
Yeah. Well, that raises a good point. How much cash do you take? Now it looks like everybody takes, you know, pretty much electronic payments and all that, but how much actual physical cash did you carry on your person to, I guess, either deal with the expenses or just to have in case of, oh goodness, we need something right now?
Well, I always like to have as much as you can afford to take with you. I think I always had $3,000 or $4,000 in $100 bills and $20 bills, and you use some of it. You know, you're in town, you get a cup of coffee. When you land, I always like to get some local money, you know, just to have for tipping and stuff like that. But I mostly had that in case you needed to leave now. Yeah, you know. It's like, will this $1,000 in American $100 bills get you and your Land Rover to take me over there? Yeah, you know. And so I've used a money belt, which actually works really well. It doesn't look like a money belt, and it is a money belt. You know, and that way it's always on you, and nobody knows you have or what it is. So that's a good way to do that. And I would be frank with the PH before you go. Say what kind of tips do you expect? A lot of times they'll say that on their websites and stuff like that, but just ask them because usually what they do is that the PH will take a tip that you leave for the staff. And then what they do is that they'll like dole it out to the staff a little bit at a time, because sometimes they don't always make the best decisions if you give them cash, you know. He said that it keeps them coming back to work the next day, you know.
Good point.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about tips, most of the websites I've been looking at say that give your PH, you know, the tips for the staff, and they'll dole it out equitably among all the staff because there's a lot of folks doing a lot of things. But what about the PH? How do you handle that?
You know, it's situationally dependent, and it can be maybe 10 to 15% of the total hunt. So if you're there and you've spent, you know, $6,000 or $8,000 with him, you know, giving them $600 or $800 $1,000 even would not be inappropriate. Right. You know, it's really up to you. And I've never felt held hostage by that. I've always waited till the very end. It's like, hey, if we had a great time and these people really took care of you, and everything was just really organized and nice, and you had a good time, well then, you know, let your heart speak for you, especially if you think you'll be going back, because then they'll say, oh, I remember him. He was a good tipper. Yeah. But I would say if you're there for 7 days, less than $500 to the PH would be a little bit insulting, maybe,
Okay.
because he's worked hard. And remember what you're paying him. He's paying staff, facility, so you may look at him and say, oh, well, I just paid him $1,000 to hunt this kudu. Well, yeah, but he's having to maintain it, the game fencing, the vehicles,
Yeah.
So
That's his business cost.
Yeah, it's not like he's making $1,000 on the kudu.
Yeah. Now, do you give him cash or, is it local cash, American dollars?
Well, American dollars pretty much are universal language down there.
Okay.
Yeah, so most everyone likes, $100 bills or something like that would be good.
Yeah.
Actually, the first time I went, I actually left one of the rifles. He fell in love with the rifle, and we had such a good time. And I will say that he gave me such a screaming deal on everything that I said, would you rather just have the rifle? And his eyes lit up. He said, yes, which interestingly enough, they were only allowed to own 4 long guns. And so his wife had 2 on her name. So she had to be the one to sort of receive this gun. And he told me it took almost 2 years for him to get it.
Oh my.
So he had to leave it with the local police.
Yeah. Well, I've read that some PHs say they appreciate the gesture, but they don't really think that's such a good thing because of the red tape. And we think we've got it bad here in the U.S., but they may be the champions of red tape out in the African bush, from what I read.
Well, I think it's ironic, the fact that most of them are not allowed to have handguns, and you're allowed like a shotgun, one sort of stopping rifle, a 22 rifle, and maybe some other. I mean, a lot of these people, they own 4 guns. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not like the old days with the British being there. You can also help a little bit with the ammunition. In other words, if you take 80 rounds for your 308, when you leave the country, it's like, gosh, that ammo, I shot it all because we practiced a lot and everything, and so if you get my drift. So
exactly.
And the other thing is that, like you take a bunch of AA batteries. That's the other thing, is I always like to take things that use AA batteries if possible. Although where we went the last time, there was plenty of charging, in the evening and stuff like that. But flashlights that use AA batteries are kind of handy, because that way if you're out there and you end up tracking some, kudu till 2 o'clock in the morning and your rechargeable flashlight takes a puke, if you've got AA lights. But what's cool about that is that you can leave things like that. You can leave the batteries with them. Leave, like I left a pair of boots I didn't want to drag back with me. I left him with one of the trackers had basically no shoes, and so I gave him my boots. I think I left a couple of shirts. I came back very minimal, very lightweight. Just basically leave everything there that you don't really need it at home.
Exactly. When you're talking about flashlights, we've all got kind of what I call an EDC light, and now those things, are screamingly bright compared to what, a typical pocket light used to be. But do you take anything bigger than that? Do you need anything bigger than that?
No, if you've got, I brought what I would call a bigger light, and we would call it like maybe a hand-sized, 6-inch tactical light that was 600 or 800 lumens. I had one of those I kept in my pack, but the light that I used constantly was that one that we really like from Streamlight, the little
MicroStream.
The little USB recharger one, because I think it's like 300 lumens or something like that.
It's just the right sweet spot.
I mean, out there where we were in the Kalahari, if you look up, the Milky Way looks like LED lights. I mean, it's
wow.
It's so bright. It's astounding. I mean, you're just like, holy crap, that's what it really looks like.
Yeah.
And so it's pitch black. There is no ambient light anywhere. And so if you shine a 300 lumen bright white LED out, well, geez, it goes for several hundred yards. You can see what you're doing. And so that's really what I used virtually all the time. Now, John, the PH, was thankful that we had the big, 500 or 600 lumen one. In case you get caught up and you end up having to chase something at night. As a matter of fact, I left that with our hosts. They had never seen anything quite like that.
Ah,
And so I said, here, and like he said, oh, thank you, because he's going to put that in his pack. That's going to be his bail them out if they need it at nighttime kind of light.
yeah,
So, but again, like just the minimum. You don't need some big, huge, and they're going to have a lot of that stuff. They're going to
yeah.
have. Actually, you'll be surprised at how much they do with how little,
Ah,
and it's just astounding. They just go, "Oh, why do you have that?" It's like, well, in case we need to, well, we'll just drive over there. They're real pragmatic. It's like if you need an end table, well, then one of the help makes it that night. And the next day there's an end table next to your bed.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
Well, honestly, that is part of the charm to me is getting out of our way of life where we have literally everything at our fingertips and getting back to not having everything at your fingertips.
Well, you come back and the first time I came back and I really seriously reevaluated stuff, and for instance, now when I go deer hunting or something, it's like basically what I have a few things in my pockets.
Yep.
There's just really, you get very much more minimalist. You take less ammunition and lighter weight rifles and simpler optics and simpler, smaller binoculars and, all that kind of stuff. I think it's really good for you. And
Yep.
they seem to be much more in the moment. They like what's happening right now. Certainly the locals seem to be that way. As I was told, it's like they don't really even know what's going to happen for lunch. They worry about lunch when it's lunchtime. It's like, now what should we do for lunch?
Yeah.
It's really, we're so obsessive about planning and everything's got to be just so, be there at this time and, and all that.
Why, Roy, I have no idea what you're talking about.
No, I realize this is foreign to you, but I think it's really will give you, if you go there, it will give you a sense of peace because it truly is about, like we were talking about that sundowner. So it's the end of the day, you've had an interesting, fun day hunting, maybe an adventure, 2 flat tires and a broken fan belt. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, they'll fix it, or they'll send some guy who walks back 15 miles and then comes back with a new fan belt. It's the damnedest thing. Yeah. So, and then you get into camp and you get cleaned up and you change into your clean clothes and you have your gin and tonic and you sit around the campfire and you eat the kudu backstrap, from the day before.
Yeah.
And you talk about the weather and the hunt and the people are smiling who are helping you there. And you see that unbelievable Milky Way up there. You just think, holy cow.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, which is the accommodations. And I realize they run the gamut. You were telling me you had a white coated safari one time where, everybody got cleaned up and served you lunch and all that, which is not necessarily my speed, but I was actually surprised when I looked around. It's not the straw huts that I anticipated. And in fact, we're trying to convince a friend to go with us. And his wife is concerned that, it may be a little rustic for them. And especially like John Sheehan, looking at his website, we've stayed in far, far worse hunting camps here.
Well, that I've stayed in a lot of hunting camps in the States here that it was scary. Yeah. The scuttle of cockroaches and rats and stuff like that. I think the default mode there is you're kind of at a family's house, really. Yeah. And you may actually be staying with them in their house in a bedroom, right? Yeah. Some other camps may have, camp isn't always the right word. Some places are camps, literally. But for instance, in kudu safaris, they actually have the houses are thatched. I mean, they're real thatch houses, on the roof. And it's weird, but it's like, that's just thatching there and it keeps the rain out. It's surprising. And, but it's dusty, of course, and stuff like that. But I never saw anything. There's flushing toilets. There's a hot shower. There was nothing that caused my wife, Susie, to go, ew, And, but I think that's why I think you really need to chat up the pH, really look at the accommodations, really see. I mean, because I know there are people who didn't do their research, and when they got there, they were a little bit surprised, The first time I had gone, it was as a guest of a firearms company, and it was truly one of those 5-star ones that you see in YouTube videos and stuff. I mean, my hut was just stunning. I mean, it was just unbelievable, and everything, bed turn downs, and
Oh my.
when you woke in the morning, you had a crumpet and a cup of hot tea. And I mean, it was just astounding. And of course, the meals were just candlelit, beautiful. I will say though that it's almost a distraction
Yeah.
from what you're wanting to do, and so that's where I think good food, a bed that's comfortable to sleep in, a roof over your head, a shower you can take if you want to, a good conversation, and an adult beverage in the evening. That's kind of really all you need, And
Yeah.
as long as you're getting that, because half of the fun is making friends with everybody, and unless the PH happens to be a real jerk, which could happen, right? Uh, you're their business, and so they take good care of you. They chat you up. They're very polite, and take the time to get to meet the locals too, because I know that's the other thing they said about some Americans. They actually said most Europeans are really kind of often can be jerks about this, is that they just ignore the trackers and everybody.
Yeah.
They're just sort of the help.
Yeah.
And they said Americans are either don't want to get their hands dirty, don't, do me, I'm here as your guest, or else they said we're generally exactly the opposite. We want to roll our sleeves up. We want to get to know everybody. We want to know the first names of all the trackers, and we want to be introduced to their kids, and we want to, have a drink with them, and they're just people, and so they like that, and they have fun. And I've got some video of our last trip, and they're always laughing. They're always laughing with you and having a good time, and and one of them was a little bit keen on Susie, and he was real shy, but he liked her because she was well. Part of it was she was making his job easy. She would shoot animals; they will fall down, right?
Yeah.
So they called her Miss One Shot, Madam One Shot. That's what he called her. And so, but there's always grinning, and then they do little things like he would stroll over and give Susie some feathers from some bird that he found,
Oh wow.
and would talk about it, or he would find an interesting bone and he would come up and give it to her. I didn't speak real good English, but that was and learn a little bit of the local language, whatever it is, Shona or whatever it is, I think even if it's just good morning,
Sure.
They like that. They laugh. They giggle. The ladies will hide their face. They get shy.
That's cool. Well, this seems silly, but in 2021, what about cell and Wi-Fi service? I realize if you're in the middle of the Kalahari, you don't have a good Wi-Fi signal, but that was just a question I wondered. I know in pretty much any city of any size now, there's cell service, but how far out in the bush do you have to get before you are off grid?
That's a very good question, actually, and especially as we become more and more connected. I think as soon as you're out of the cities, you're out of cell service. Period.
Mm-hmm.
With very rare exceptions. In the cities, it was excellent for us, and you can either get this extension on your own self-service. You have to call your own provider and they tell you how do you get cell service when you're going. Some people just buy a local phone if you really have to have it, but we didn't. We just used our phone. We mostly didn't have cell service around, if you can do Wi-Fi calling, of course, in your hotels and things like that, there's always Wi-Fi. At the camps, it's virtually all satellite driven stuff. So, we didn't attempt to make any cell phone calls. We actually did pretty good texting.
I was going to say, we talked to you, which shocked me. I figured you were going to be in a black hole for 10 days, and I kept getting these little updates, and it's like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we had Wi-Fi email, so I used my iPad, and we were able to communicate and send pictures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when we were sitting around the campfire at their house, which was 7,500 yards away from the cabin that we were staying at, we had a little bit stronger Wi-Fi signal. And one night I was sitting there and my phone went off and it was my front doorbell ring alarm, right? And I thought, well, that's hysterical. And so I turned it on, and it was my daughter was taking care of our dogs, and she had let the dogs out, and she was standing on the front porch. And so you can talk, right? And so I hit the turn it on button, and I said, "Hey, Madison," and she like turned around and looked at, and I said, "It's Daddy. We're talking from Africa, sitting around the campfire." And so we had a little bit of a visit.
Wow.
I know it was just a real hoot, but I
Yeah.
think if you're in camp, chances are pretty good they're going to have some kind of, satellite-based Wi-Fi. But I would be prepared for not too. I mean,
Yeah.
you literally may be out there for 10 days and not have any communication. And so there it is,
Another logistical thing is insurance. Do you guys get trip insurance and African health insurance, or do you not worry about it, or what's the practice there?
That's another really good question. When on my first trip, we went to Zimbabwe, which had virtually no infrastructure. And so I bought the emergency evacuation medical insurance, and it was actually surprisingly affordable. It was like $275, I think. And
versus
for that,
probably $100,000 to get you back if you were bedridden.
Yeah. And for that, they literally will come and get you wherever you are and fly you to, it's usually Europe, if that's where you need to go or whatever, but they'll get you to the hospital. And I thought, damn, that's pretty good. Now where we were, most of your normal medical insurance will pay when you're traveling, for emergency and stuff like that. But the other thing to remember is where we were, the local town, Sabong, they have a little hospital there. But you can go there and like John Sheehan, he gets some shots he gets that are $800 here. It's like $15 there.
Wow.
And you get an X-ray and it's $10. And so a lot of that stuff, if you break your arm or something, you just a couple $100 and you're good to go. So I don't know. I think if I was going to a real third worldy place, I would get that emergency evacuation insurance. But if I was going to a place where the PH is pretty responsible, there's some medical attention nearby, I personally, I would probably take the risk. I don't know. I really don't know. I think if you've got a medical issue, like, hey, I could have a heart attack tomorrow or something, well, maybe you shouldn't go to Africa. But if you do go, probably buying the evacuation insurance would be good. And talk to the PH, because they are the answer to everything. They've seen it all. Because they've hosted everybody of every flavor in the world. And so they know what they can manage. They know what they can't deal with, So plus the more you talk to him before you go, the more you get to know him. And before you put your deposit down, if the red light warning comes up, you can certainly say, well, hey, Fred, thanks a lot. It's been great chatting with you. And then go find another one.
Yeah. What about safety? Not just in terms of transportation mishaps, because that could happen here, but what about just personal safety and then, your stuff lying around?
Brent, you're asking a lot of really good questions. And I think Americans tend to be in white or yellow.
Yeah, condition white.
Unaware of what's going on around them. While we were there, just the last trip, our hosts drove their Toyota Land Cruiser to South Africa, Johannesburg. They had to have a meeting with somebody there. And so it was a bit of an unexpected thing. It was about a 10-hour drive. And while there, they had an attempt carjacking at gunpoint, and Ricky, he came from Zimbabwe in the old days when it was Rhodesia, and he's a tough old bird, man, and he was like, yeah, now over my dead body, you're going to get my car, and he leaned on the horn and they zoomed out of it and crashed into another car when they did that and went around the corner. And then they, and so it's there, and it's actually kind of worse in South Africa in the urban areas like that. But I think you have to be careful. I would always keep track of all of your valuables, period. I would not travel with any kind of significant jewelry. Don't leave your bangles at home, ladies and gentlemen. Leave your $3,000 Rolex at home. You're not going to impress anybody there. They don't care. They're there to hunt. with you, so
my diamond stud earring, I can leave that at home.
Yeah, bring your $25 Timex, and your simple gold stud earrings if you want to, but definitely keep track of your belongings. Don't brag to people, say, I've got $5,000 in my money belt, just don't. And now they're in your room every day, cleaning your room and doing your laundry and stuff. And so, use discretion, just like you would anywhere. Every American hotel that I've stayed in the last 10 years had a safe in their room, and that's here. So, so just be aware of that. But I would say if you're overnighting somewhere and for some reason you're having to go to South Africa, you're in Johannesburg and you have to overnight there as part of your travel, well, don't go for a walk at 11 o'clock at night on the street,
Yeah.
because you're going to get robbed probably, so don't be an idiot. But again, go with what the locals say, when you're staying at your hotel, for instance, where we were in Gaborone, it evidently really is safe at night on the streets. It's such an unusual place. And the police and the military are separate agencies. Neither one of them have loyalty to the government. So when we were there was a vote. There's been a smooth transition to a new president there. I mean, it's truly amazing. The policemen that I met while we were there were very professional. And
really?
Oh yeah, I mean, they were squared away and professional, and the soldiers were very professional looking. And their job was border security and internal security. They were not there to support politics. And I was very surprised. But anyway, it evidently was safe to walk on the streets. We had a half a day. We went to a local mall. We walked over there. It was just absolutely delightful. The people were great. We had lunch at a restaurant. Everybody wanted to visit. Where are you from? How did you like our country? And so it really is situationally dependent. I probably wouldn't have done that were we in Harare, Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
So, but if you're at another place like this, I think it's appropriate. So just keep your wits about you. If it doesn't sound like a good idea, it's probably not a good idea.
And again, ask the PH. That's the alpha and omega of hunting in Africa, is find out from your PH.
Oh yeah, if he looks at you and says, "No, mate, I wouldn't do that." Well, guess what?
Probably not, mate.
Yeah, don't do that, because they want to keep you alive anyway. I think that just concentrate, and even the flights there, lest we risk going too long here, but make the flights there be part of the adventure. I do recommend that you break it up in 2 bites.
Right.
Otherwise, it is an 18-hour flight. You land at Tenerife, is that how they say that? And they refuel and rearm there, but you're not allowed off the plane. So, then it's another 8 hours down across Africa to wherever you're going. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So we recommend going. You can go to Zurich, you can go to Frankfurt. I mean, you can go to Dubai now. Fly to Dubai, and it's actually really affordable, and then straight down from Dubai. But what's cool about that is that you have a 10-hour flight, which is really doable. In my case, I watched every movie, including the chick flicks, and of course they feed you pretty well, and you drink, and I mean, it's just, you sleep and just have a big adventure,
Yeah.
And then when you get where you're going, you get a hotel and don't worry about that. It costs $250. I'm not spending $250 for a hotel. Yeah, you are. Just spend $250 and get a hotel at the airport, and you go and take a nice hot shower, and you sleep in a real bed, and then you get back on the airplane and the second half of your adventure, and it's just really fun to have that be all part of it. Huh?
Well, we have gone long here, but there's just so many questions. But one of the things we were talking about before we actually got started, and I should have been recording it, was we were talking about cost. And what amazes me is, of course, there's a full range of how you want to do it. But for like normal Earth people like us, the cost is actually surprisingly affordable. Granted, when you add flights and all that miscellaneous, this is not an inexpensive vacation, but anybody of middle class, upper middle class, at least once in their life should be able to afford this by putting their lunch money away and saving. And what you were saying, though, is you can't measure this adventure in the dollars spent.
Well, you can't. I saw the other day, there's a local hunting ranch that charges $5,000 for a white-tailed deer hunt. Okay.
Wow.
I have a friend who's right as we speak, as a matter of fact, is on a $15,000 elk hunt. It's like, really? Well, both of those would be African. The $15,000 one would be a 5-star African safari.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like white dinner jackets, kind of out of Africa kind of stuff. So we Americans, because we're used to saying, well, that's $25 and that's $23.95. So I'm going to go with the 23. You need to get that gene out of your head for a minute when you're looking at this, and that look at the experience that you want and then be willing to pay that cost. Because I've seen this. People say, well, I want this experience, but oh gosh, I don't really want to spend $3,000 for it. I only want to spend $2,000. And so they end up with something that they really didn't want to do. And then they come back and they regret it forever because they didn't want to spend $3,000 extra dollars. Where it was Sir Henry Royce, I think it was, said about Rolls Royces he said the cost of purchase is long forgotten while the joys of ownership continue. And this is like that. If you spend $2,000 or $3,000 more than you really wanted to, I promise you, 6 months from now or a year from now, you absolutely will not even think about that. Meanwhile, you're looking at your kudu mount, you're telling stories, you're looking at pictures that you had a good time, you've got your 460 Weatherby that you bought when you got home because you wanted to go back. So you just don't be a cheapskate on this one. It's really important. And sell some of those polymer pistols and put that money to work.
Exactly. Well, Roy, thanks for talking to us. I've made a list here. We're going to have to do part 3, I'm afraid.
I'm in.
We appreciate you talking to us about Africa, and I've got a whole list of stuff to ask you on part 3, so we'll do it one of these days.
All right, Brian, it was a lot of fun. I look forward to the next one.
Well, it was great talking to Roy, and I've got safari fever worse than ever. And with that, we hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Please tell all your friends, even those raging liberals. Guns Magazine is #1 in the business, and we're using our decades of friendships to bring you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got questions or comments, please drop me a line. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you don't miss out on anything by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast directory and YouTube. Of course, you can always listen and download our episodes at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're at it, don't forget to check out our sister publication, American Handgunner Magazine, at americanhandgunner.com. And finally, before we go, I'd like to remind you to check out our sponsor, Kimber Firearms, at kimberamerica.com. That's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of the hardworking staff here at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.